Okay, this is part 2 of our look at arpeggios on Autumn Leaves, and as you can probably hear, it's still raining here, so I do apologise about the background noise, but not a lot I can do about it. Anyway, let's get back to arpeggios. Now, if you remember in the first video, we were looking at playing 1, 3, 5, 7 on the first few chords of Autumn Leaves, which was giving us now the one chord which I forgot, being honest, to add in there was that diminished chord I mentioned in the first video, which I put right at the end of that little sequence. It was an A flat diminished 7th chord. You might also know that chord voicing as a G7 flat 9 chord. They're basically the same chord. I'm not going to go into all the theory about it just now, but we'll call it A flat diminished for the moment. Now, if we're going to play an arpeggio on that, the arpeggio I'm going to suggest begins from the root of the diminished chord, the A flat note, and you simply play an arpeggio which is the following. It's all in minor third intervals. A flat, B natural, D and F. And you can hear a pretty good fit for the chord. And again, I'm going to play this relatively low on the guitar simply because you may be more familiar with the root notes on the 6th and the 5th string. So slowly, the whole sequence again will be. Arpeggio at the end. Now, what I'm not doing as yet in any of this is playing in different fingerings or playing in different registers on the, or in a higher register on the fingerboard. That's extremely important to do, and may take you a little bit of time to work out other places on the fretboard that you can play these arpeggios, but that's extremely important to do. But I would suggest as a starting point, particularly if this kind of practice is new to you, to maybe start with the fingerings that you can see I'm using on the fingerboard. They're relatively common, and I think you should be able to get them under your fingers quite quickly. But if you want to use different fingerings that are more comfortable, yeah, that's fine too. As long as it's the right notes from the arpeggio, that's all that matters at this stage. Okay, so we looked at playing 1, 3, 5, 7 on each chord. We then looked at reversing that, going 7, 5, 3, 1 relative to each chord. The next thing I want to have a look at is trying to use these arpeggios in a melodic way, and in a way that will fit the passage of the chords, the harmonic rhythm of the music, which is basically how many beats are applied to each chord. Now, a very simple approach you can take here is not dissimilar to what some bass players might do when they play a walking bass line, which is that they're thinking in a quarter note division of the bar. So they would think of one, in our case with the arpeggio, they think of one note from the arpeggio matching each quarter note in the bar. So if we're counting that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or in that last one, instead of playing 2 bars of G minor 7th, which I did there, you could play it as, and use that diminished arpeggio I mentioned. Either are fine for the moment. It's really just to get this concept under your fingers. Now, counting it like that is actually very, very useful, because one thing I used to find a lot was getting lost on jazz standards, including Autumn Leaves, when I first started playing, because I was trying to remember the chords and make sure I went to the correct chord. And very often, if I'm honest about it, I'd end up playing things like 5/4 bars, putting gaps between chords where there shouldn't be any. And I realised over time that one of the reasons for that was I was not thinking about the time and the rhythm of the piece of music, the harmonic rhythm of the music. So when you play quarter notes, or the arpeggio notes are played as quarter notes like that, it's a good way of keeping you focused and centred as to how many beats are applied to each chord. So this would work on any tune where you have chords like this, that you simply play this quarter note feel all the way through it. Basically it's one note of the arpeggio per beat in the bar, per quarter note beat in the bar. The principal drawback of that, after you've practiced it for a while, is it does sound very mechanical. Now what you can do to try and make it more interesting is you can try and slightly syncopate the rhythm that you're using, or you could perhaps try introducing some other rhythms when you're practicing. What I'm getting at there was if you were playing it sort of 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm not doing anything too crazy with it, and it's not super perfect in time, I'm well aware of that, but it gives you a way of trying to get a little bit of swing into it, and something which just gives it a bit of life rather than just literally playing strict quarter notes. But I do want to emphasise I would do strict quarter notes first until you're comfortable with that, and then try something that's a little bit looser like that. Now, next point with this is where do you go from there? You might already be a kind of intermediate level player. You've done this kind of practice before playing arpeggios. What's the next stage with it? Well, for me, I found that the next kind of most beneficial way to practice this sort of stuff was to start mixing the note order up. Now, as we've been playing it, it's 1, 3, 5, 7 on every chord, and of course that has a consistency in the sound, but it can also get quite boring after a while. So one thing I found was helpful was to try and change the order of the notes. And I think I'm right in saying there's 24 possible combinations of 4 notes. I seem to remember reading that somewhere. Now, that's a lot to practice, and I've come across people, and if I'm honest, I've done it a few times. I've written out, all 24 combinations of an arpeggio and practice it that way, and that's very detailed practice and beneficial to do. But if you simply just want to get going with this, and you want to kind of trust your ear a little bit with it, what you can also do is after you've practiced 1, 3, 5, 7, or 7, 5, 3, 1, you can try, as it were, on the fly, mixing the note combinations. So you might do something taking a lot of liberties with the time there because I'm not playing against any kind of groove or with the drummer or anything. But you can hear from that mixing the thing we talked about earlier, slightly syncopating the rhythms, maybe playing some of the stuff a little bit off the beat, and also changing the order of the notes of the arpeggio. It starts to really breathe a little bit of life into it. And that for me was a great crossing point between playing pure exercise based material to something that was beginning, it's a long way to go yet, but it's beginning to sound a little bit more like it's an improvised idea, because I don't know before I play what order of pitches I'm going to play. So what I was trying to do there was thinking, okay, I've got a pool of notes, a root, a third, a fifth and a seventh in each one of these chords, and I can pick whichever one I'd like to begin with, and then the remaining notes I can play in any order I want. So that in itself is a fair bit of work, but it's also very rewarding work because you start to find combinations that you like. You may play 2 or 3 chords using very similar ideas with the same intervals, relative intervals against each chord, or you may decide to do something completely different on each chord. But it takes the thing away from being just an exercise-based idea. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that for this video. Quite a bit of material there to work with. If you've got any questions and you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to put them in the comments section. Very happy to do that, and I think it's de rigueur these days to say if you like these lessons and you like what I'm doing so far on the channel, please hit subscribe. I'm going to be trying to do these fairly regularly each week. I'm trying to keep everything at a fairly straightforward level. I don't want to get into anything too advanced just yet, but I may do that in some future videos just to see how these go. But as I say, any comments or thoughts that you've got, please let me know. As I say, I can't do much about the rain, unfortunately, so that's not disturbed this video too much. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.